The night Serena Voss learned what her husband truly thought of her, she was standing in the hallway, outside the parlor door, holding a tray of tea she had made because she thought, foolishly, that he might want something warm. She had not meant to listen. That was the thing she would come back to, in the months that followed. She had not meant to listen. She had simply stopped walking because she heard her name. Not Serena, not even my wife, but something else. Something in the pitch of his voice that made her feet go still before her mind could catch up. "Serena," Edmund Voss said, and then he laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the kind of laugh that softened something. It was the laugh of a man completely at ease, speaking in a room he believed was private. "She still sets a place for me at breakfast, every morning, as though I might actually sit down." There was another voice. "Charles, probably, Edmund's oldest friend. She's very thorough," Charles said, the way a man might describe a piece of furniture. "She's very earnest," Edmund said. The word landed like a stone in still water. That's the trouble with a woman who genuinely believes the arrangement means something. You can't be cruel to her. She simply doesn't understand that she's being managed. The tray was in Serena's hands. She could feel the weight of it, the warm china pressing into her palms. The hallway was cold. It was March 1831, and the house on Dunmore Street had not yet warmed through from winter. And she stood there in the corridor. She had swept herself because the housemaid had taken ill, and she listened to her husband explain to his friend that she was being managed. She was 26 years old. She had been married for 5 years. Serena had not expected love when she married Edmund Voss. She had not been foolish enough for that. She was the daughter of a minor merchant from Providence, the second of 4 daughters, and when Edmund's family had made the inquiry through her father's business associate, she had understood exactly what was being offered. Security, a house, a name. The Voss family had money. Her family needed it. She had said yes with her eyes open. What she had not expected, what she could not have anticipated, was how much work she would put into trying anyway. She had learned the household accounts within the first month. She had memorized Edmund's preferences, the specific cut of meat he liked, the way he took his coffee, the names of his clients, and which of them he found tedious. She had spent 5 years laying a table he never sat at, and keeping a house he treated as a boarding arrangement. She had written his correspondence when his hand pained him. She had hosted dinners she planned alone, and attended social calls she made alone, and sat alone in a parlor that was decorated in colors she had not chosen because Edmund had already furnished the house before the wedding, and had seen no reason to change anything. She had told herself it was enough. That arrangements worked differently than love. That she was practical, and practicality had its own rewards. What she had not told herself, what she had never quite put into words even privately, was that she had spent 5 years hoping to be seen as something more than managed. She stood in the hallway until Charles left. Then she went back to the kitchen and set the tea tray down on the table. She stood at the sink and looked out the window at the dormant garden she had planted herself in the first year of their marriage, when she had still believed in the symbolic value of growing things in shared soil. She stayed there for a long time. Then she went upstairs, quietly, and she began to think. She did not make a scene. She had never been a woman who made scenes. What she did instead was go through the house with the careful eye of someone taking inventory, which, it turned out, was exactly what she was doing. The small writing desk in the upstairs bedroom, that had been her grandmother's. She knew because her grandmother's initials were scratched faintly into the lower left drawer, a girlhood habit that had never been sanded out. Serena had brought it to the marriage, and Edmund had claimed the study for his own things, so it had ended up in the bedroom and been forgotten. The blue quilt on the bed she had made herself, over the course of 2 winters, from fabric scraps she had accumulated and organized and sewn by lamplight. Edmund had never once commented on it. The cabinet in the kitchen with the repaired hinge, she had repaired that hinge herself, with a borrowed tool and an instructional letter from her brother-in-law, because Edmund had said he would see to it for 4 months and then hadn't. She went through every room like this, quietly, methodically. She was not angry, or she was angry, but the anger had gone somewhere underneath the thinking, the way fire goes underground in certain kinds of soil, burning through layers no one can see until the surface shifts, and you realize the whole structure has changed. She had 1480 in a tin box she kept in the drawer of the writing desk. She had set it aside over 3 years, small amounts from the household money that she had accounted for meticulously, so that no one could call it theft, because she had learned early in the marriage that Edmund reviewed the accounts monthly, and that he did it not from distrust but from habit, the way a man checks the locks without expecting to find anything wrong. $14.80. She looked at it for a long time. Then she thought about her grandmother's house. She had not thought about the house in Kellerton in years. It was her maternal grandmother's place. A small property outside the town, 2 rooms and a loft and 12 acres of land that had belonged to the family since before Serena was born. Her grandmother, Edna, had died 6 years ago, and the property had passed through the family in a way that had never been entirely settled. Because Edna had died without a clear will, and the land had remained technically unresolved while Serena's mother and her mother's sister had disagreed about what to do with it. But Serena's mother had written to her last autumn, a letter Serena had read and then set aside, because there was dinner to be organized, and Edmund had guests coming. And in the letter her mother had mentioned that her Aunt Beatrice had finally decided she wanted nothing to do with the property, that Beatrice was moving to Maryland with her daughter and did not need land in a town she no longer visited, and that the question of what happened to the Kellerton house was now between Serena's mother and Serena herself, as the eldest daughter in that line. Serena went to the writing desk. She found the letter in the 3rd drawer. She read it again slowly, in the thin afternoon light coming through the bedroom window, and she thought about 12 acres of land and a house with a loft, and a woman who had lived there alone for 40 years, and apparently never felt the need to explain herself to anyone. The next morning, while Edmund was at his office on Tremont Street, Serena wrote 2 letters. The first was to her mother, asking about the Kellerton property in language that was careful and specific. Who held the deed, what the tax situation was, whether the structure was still standing, and whether it was possible that Serena might visit. The second letter was harder to write, and she sat with it for a long time before she wrote a word. It was to her sister June, who lived in Worcester, and who had been married for 11 years to a man Serena privately thought was dull but decent, and who was the only person in Serena's life she trusted enough to tell the truth to. I am thinking of leaving, she wrote. Not leaving the state or the country. Leaving Dunmore Street. I heard something last night that I cannot unhear, and I have been thinking about it since, and I believe I have been making a mistake for 5 years that I called practicality. She paused. I am not sure exactly what I am doing, but I am thinking that grandmother's land in Kellerton might be a start, if I can make the arrangements. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to tell you. She sealed the letter before she could change her mind. The reply from her mother arrived in 9 days. The reply from June arrived in 6. June wrote, come to Worcester first. Don't go directly. I have things to tell you about grandmother's land that you don't know yet. Serena read that sentence 4 times. She waited until Edmund left on a Tuesday morning in April. He was traveling to Hartford on business, 2 nights away, which he told her about on Sunday, with the same tone he used to inform her of changes in the weather. And then she packed a bag. Not a large bag. She packed with the efficiency of someone who understood that what she took now was not everything she would ever have, but what she could carry without help. Her grandmother's writing desk she could not take. She pressed her hand against the top of it for a moment, feeling the worn wood under her palm, and then she left it. She took the blue quilt, folded into her bag. She took her letters, her tin of money, a change of clothes, her grandmother's reading glasses which had come to her at the death, and which she kept in a small case she carried everywhere. She took the household account book she had kept for 5 years, because her name was on every page and it was the record of her work, and she was not leaving it behind. She left the house at 8 in the morning. She walked to the coaching inn on Lander Street, where she paid for a seat on the Worcester mail coach. It cost $4.20. She had $10.60 remaining. She sat in the coach with her bag on her lap and her hands folded over it, and she watched the streets of the city go by through the smudged glass window. And she felt, for the first time in a very long time, that she was thinking clearly. June met her at the door. June Hartley. She had been June Morse before the marriage, was 4 years older than Serena and looked it, in the particular way of women who had worked hard and slept well, and built something they were satisfied with. She had 2 children, a vegetable garden, and the direct manner of someone who had decided long ago that she didn't have time for things that weren't true. She took Serena's bag from her hands without asking. I'm glad you wrote, she said. I'm glad you came. She made tea. She made something to eat. She sat across the kitchen table from Serena in the ordinary afternoon light of an ordinary house, and she said, I need to tell you about grandmother's will. There had, it turned out, been a will. Or something close to one. A document that Edna had made with the help of a local solicitor named Graves, who had since died himself, and which had been in the possession of the solicitor's widow for 6 years, because there had been some confusion about who was meant to receive notification, and because Edna had specifically asked that the document not be shared until there was a woman in the family who needed it. She said that, June told her. I'm not making it up. The widow, Mrs. Graves, wrote to Mother last November, and Mother wrote to me, and I've been waiting to know what you were going to do. Serena sat very still. What does the document say? She asked. Grandmother left the Kellerton land to you, June said. Not to Mother, not to Aunt Beatrice. To you specifically by name, she said. June reached across the table and slid a letter toward her. Read it. The letter was written in a solicitor's careful hand, recording the instructions Edna had given. The language was formal, but at the center of it was something Edna had apparently dictated directly, in her own words, which the solicitor had copied down as asked. The 12 acres at Kellerton, and the house on it, go to my granddaughter Serena, because she is the one who will know what to do with land. She has a farmer's sense of a thing, even if no one has given her a farm. I want her to have somewhere that is hers, not her husband's, not anyone's but hers. Serena read it twice, then she looked up at June. Jin. She knew, June said simply. Serena said. Grandmother always knew. Mrs. Graves was 71, sharp-eyed, and completely unbothered by the idea of a woman arriving to claim property without her husband present. Your grandmother was a practical woman, she said, when Serena sat across from her in the small front room of the house on Cavendish Lane. She didn't believe in waste. She thought land was wasted on people who didn't need it. The deed transfer was a matter of paperwork, which took 2 visits and a witness, and June served as the witness. Serena signed her own name and felt the pen moving across the paper with the strange sensation of doing something that could not be undone. This was, she would later think, the moment the shape of things changed. Not the night in the hallway. Not the coach to Worcester. This, her signature on a deed, in a room that smelled of old paper and early spring, with her sister sitting beside her, and a woman she'd only just met watching with the calm approval of someone who had seen this particular transaction before. She owned land. 12 acres in Kellerton, Connecticut, and a house on it, and it was hers. They went to Kellerton on a Thursday in late April, the two of them together, in a hired conveyance because June had insisted on seeing the place herself. The road was muddy, and the last stretch was barely a road at all, and the house, when they reached it, was small and had been closed for 6 years, and smelled of must and old wood, and the particular stillness of a building that had been waiting. But the bones were right. Serena walked through each room slowly. The kitchen was workable. The hearth in the main room was intact. The loft above was solid. She tested the ladder herself, and climbed it, and stood in the low-ceilinged space, looking out the small east-facing window at the fields below, which were overgrown but not ruined, which was something. 12 acres. Not all of it arable. There was a woodlot to the north that she could see from the window, and a wet section near the back that would need drainage. But enough. More than enough for someone who knew how to think about it. What are you going to do? June asked, from the floor below. Serena climbed back down the ladder. I'm going to open the windows first, she said. Then I'm going to make a list. June stayed 3 days. In those 3 days, they cleaned the house, swept it, aired it, scrubbed the kitchen, and oiled the window hinges, and cleared the hearth of a bird's nest that had been there God knows how long. They catalogued what was there. The furniture Edna had left behind, which included a kitchen table and 4 chairs, and an ancient rope bed, and several items of practical value that Serena began to see differently once she stopped thinking of them as things left over and started thinking of them as things she now had. June knew people in Kellerton, distantly, a family called the Fentworths who had a farm 2 miles east, and a woman named Della Marsh who ran the dry goods on the main street, and was, according to June, someone who knew everything about everyone and was generally reliable about which of that knowledge was useful. Serena went to the dry goods store on the second day. Della Marsh was perhaps 40, with the kind of voice that had clearly spent years cutting through noise to be heard, and she looked at Serena with open assessment when June made the introduction. Edna's granddaughter, she said. Yes, Serena said. She talked about you. Della sat down the she'd been labeling, said you had good sense, said you'd come eventually. She paused, said it might take you a while to figure out you were allowed to. Serena had not expected that. She was right on all counts, Serena said, when she found her voice. Della almost smiled. The Fentworth boy plows for hire in the spring, she said. If you're thinking about the South Field, and there's a widow on the Hartley Road who takes in sewing, but she's a better hand than most, and she's been looking for something more regular. If you're thinking about work. She looked at Serena directly. Are you thinking about work? I'm thinking about all of it, Serena said. Good, said Delamarche. Edmund sent a letter, eventually. It arrived in the second week of May, addressed to Serena in care of June's house in Worcester, which was where he'd apparently written first. She read it standing at the kitchen window of the Kellerton house, in the early morning light, while the kettle came up to heat. It was not angry. That surprised her, a little. It was managed. He had written it the way he managed everything, with a kind of careful control that maintained the surface of things even when the surface was cracking. He said he had returned from Hartford to find her gone. He said he had spoken to her mother, who had told him very little. He said he wished to understand the situation. He asked her to correspond with him regarding her intentions, and he used the word intentions twice, as though she were a business matter that required clarification. He did not ask if she was well. He did not say he missed her. He did not say he was sorry. Serena read the letter a second time, and then a third, looking for something she might have missed. Some crack in the managed surface, some word that was not calculated, some evidence that beneath the arrangement he had felt anything at all. She did not find it. She sat down at the kitchen table, Edna's table, in Edna's kitchen, on land that was now Serena's, and she thought for a long time about what it meant to be married to a man who did not know how to want you. Then she picked up a pen. Mr. Voss, she wrote. The formality was deliberate. I am well. I am in Kellerton, at my grandmother's property, which I have recently learned she left to me in a formal document made 6 years ago. I intend to remain here and to work the land. I believe this arrangement is, in the long term, better suited to both of our circumstances than the one we have been maintaining. I trust you will be able to manage the household on Dunmore Street without difficulty. You have always managed things with efficiency. She paused. She thought about the hallway, the tray of tea, the cold corridor, and his voice coming through the door, completely at ease, explaining to someone else that she was being managed. I will not be writing again unless there is a legal matter requiring my attention, she added. I wish you no ill. I simply no longer wish to be managed. She signed it, Serena Morse Voss, both names, her own and the one she had taken. She was still working out which parts of the last 5 years she was keeping and which she was leaving behind. The name, for now, she kept, because it was on the deed to the land and it was too soon to change the paperwork again. She sealed the letter. She did not cry. She had expected to, and she didn't, and she sat with that for a moment, not relief, exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that felt like the first real breath in a very long time. She mailed the letter on her way to meet the Fentworth boy about the South Field. The first season was hard. She had known it would be, in the abstract way you know things before they happen to you. What she had not known was the specific texture of it. The particular difficulty of being a woman alone on a piece of land in 1831. Trying to establish something from scratch, in a town where people were polite but cautious, where she was an outsider and a wife without a husband present, and a person with plans that required explanation every time she talked to someone new. The Fentworth boy plowed the South Field, and she planted kitchen garden crops that first year, not wheat, nothing ambitious. Things she could tend herself and sell locally. Beans, squash, potatoes, onions. She calculated it on paper first, the way she'd calculated the Dunmore Street household accounts, and she arrived at numbers that were not comfortable but were not impossible, if she was careful and if the season was decent. Delamarche was better than useful. She was the kind of person who knew exactly which information to give and when, who introduced Serena to the right people without making a production of it, who mentioned casually in conversation that Edna's granddaughter was setting up at the old place, and leaving it to the listener to draw their own conclusions. Half of Kellerton had known Edna. Edna had apparently been well regarded. This transferred, in the small daily ways that mattered. The widow on the Hartley Road was named Frances Cope, and she was 48, and had been widowed for 3 years, and had 2 daughters, one of whom still lived at home. She came to the Kellerton house in late May, and looked around with the same careful assessment Serena had already come to recognize as the particular expression of a woman evaluating whether a situation was worth her time. I sow, Frances said. I also preserve, and I know the curing process for the kind of meat that keeps through winter. And I can rewrite, if that matters. It matters, Serena said. I'd need something regular, Frances said. Not just when it's convenient. I understand that, Serena said. I was not offering convenient. I was offering regular. Frances looked at her for a moment. Then she said, all right then. She started the following Monday. By September, the South Field had produced. Not bountifully. This was the first season and the soil needed work, and Serena had been conservative in what she planted, but enough. She sold at the Kellerton market on Saturday mornings. At a table she set up herself and tended herself, and she came home at noon with her accounting in the small book she kept in her coat pocket, and she sat at the kitchen table and updated the ledger she'd started in April. The numbers were not yet what they needed to be, but they were moving in the right direction. She wrote to June and September and described the harvest. She described Francis and the arrangement they had worked out, which had evolved over the summer into something more like a partnership than either of them had originally intended. She described Della Marsh, who had become, Serena was still working out the word for it, something like a friend, though the friendship was practical and dry, and expressed itself mainly in useful information, and the occasional cup of very strong coffee. She did not write about Edmund. She had not heard from him again after the letter she sent in May. She did not know if that meant he had accepted the situation or simply decided not to dignify it with further correspondence. Either way, there was nothing to say about it. The silence was information, and the information was familiar, and she had made her peace with familiar information. What she had not expected was that the peace would grow, not all at once, not cleanly. There were nights that winter when the house was very cold and very quiet, and she lay in Edna's rope bed under her blue quilt and felt the weight of the choice she had made. Not regret, exactly, but the full knowledge of what she had given up, the security of Dunmore Street, the structure, the known quantity of a life that was predictable, even if it was empty. She had traded predictable emptiness for uncertain fullness. She was not always sure it had been the right trade. But she made herself think of him in that parlor, at ease, explaining her to Charles, as though she were a piece of furniture that had been arranged to suit the room, and the uncertainty resolved back into something harder and steadier. She had not been seen on Dunmore Street. She was being seen in Kellerton, by Della, by Francis, by the Fentworth family, by the Saturday market customers who came back week after week and brought their neighbors and said, once or twice, with the plain approval of people who respected competence, "You know what you're doing." She did not know what she was doing, entirely, but she was learning. By the following spring, she had saved enough to hire 2 people for the planting season. She expanded the south field. She started keeping a record, not the household accounts kind but a different kind. Observations about the soil, about what worked and what didn't, about the drainage problem in the back acreage and what she thought might fix it. Francis's daughter, Nell, who was 16 and had her mother's practical intelligence and a faster mind for numbers than either of them, began helping with the market accounts on Saturday afternoons. Serena taught her what she knew about the ledger system she'd developed. Nell improved it within 3 weeks. Serena wrote down the improvement in the record book and noted who had suggested it. She was building something. She could feel it the way you feel a structure taking shape when you're the one laying each piece. Slowly, materially, with the specific knowledge of where every part came from and how much it had cost and what it was holding up. 2 springs later, the Kellerton house had a mended roof and a working kitchen garden, and the south field was producing reliably, and the drainage problem in the back acreage had been addressed with the help of a surveyor, and considerably more work than she'd initially anticipated but less money, finally, than she had feared. The writing desk from Dunmore Street had arrived, unexpectedly, in the autumn of the 2nd year. Edmund had sent it. No letter with it, only the desk, wrapped in cloth and delivered by a carter who had driven up from the city. She had stood in the yard and looked at it for a long moment. Then she had the carter bring it inside, and she put it under the east window, where the morning light came in, and she set her grandmother's reading glasses on top of it and her account book beside them. She did not know what to make of the gesture. She thought about it, sometimes, and she did not arrive at a clean conclusion. He had sent the desk. That was all she could say with certainty. Whatever it meant, it was the most direct acknowledgement he had ever given that something in the house on Dunmore Street had belonged to her. She used the desk every morning. It seemed like the right response. She was 29 when she first sat on the low stone wall at the edge of the south field, in the late afternoon of an October day, and felt, for the first time in her adult life, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not happy in the uncomplicated way of someone who had never had anything difficult happen to them. Not satisfied in the way of someone who had gotten everything they wanted, but present, in the particular way of a person who has built something with her own hands and her own decisions and her own careful attention, and who understands that what she is standing on is real because she made it real. The field was put to bed for the season. The accounts were balanced. Nell had gone home at noon. Francis was in the kitchen doing something that smelled like preserved pears, and the smell of it drifted out the open window and across the yard, and Serena sat on the stone wall and breathed it in. She thought about her grandmother, about a woman who had lived on 12 acres for 40 years and died leaving behind a document that said, "She's the one who will know what to do with land." She thought about the fact that Edna had known, 6 years before Serena herself knew. She thought about all the things she had told herself on Dunmore Street. That arrangement was enough. That practicality had its own rewards. That being managed was not the same as being trapped. She thought about the hallway, the tray of tea, her feet going still before her mind could catch up. And then she set all of it down, the way you set down something you have been carrying a long time, carefully, deliberately, in a place where you can leave it. She picked up the small notebook she had started keeping that summer, the one where she wrote observations and plans, and the occasional things she wanted to remember. She opened it to a new page. At the top, October 14, 1833. Then she wrote, "Southfield has done well. Drainage solution holding through the wet season. Nell to take on the market accounts, full-time starting spring. Next year, North Fence, second surveyor visit." She considered the page. Then she added, below the list, "Grandmother was right about the land. She was right about most things. I am only sorry it took me so long to arrive." She closed the notebook. The light was going. She could hear Francis in the kitchen, the small ordinary sounds of a house that was being used. She stayed on the stone wall a little longer, watching the last of the afternoon move across the field she had planted and tended, and learned to read the way you learn to read something that matters to you. Slowly, with attention, over years. Then she went inside.